Y'all hear me? I think it's coming through. No? No? Yeah? Okay, it's just not real loud. I wasn't being very loud, which is unusual. I can be loud. Okay. Yeah, if you watch the video, you realize how much Martha was just saying that. I realize how important it is to use the, oh, what are my pockets? Anyway, how important it is to use the microphone because you can't hear, you don't even hear just a little bit. It's nothing. It's all or nothing. So, yeah. And you hear me go, yeah. And I try to catch and repeat the big part, big parts of it, but if it's more than a few words, it doesn't get repeated. All right, well, let's open with prayer. I don't know if Betty's going to be here. I went ahead and started record, so whoever's watching it will just get a little extra. Let's open with prayer. God, we come to you tonight. We just come to you with open hearts and humble hearts, and God, we're open to your truth. God, help us to just open the pages of your word and have good discussion with the things that you have shown us this week and the things that you show each of us individually. And God, we ask that you would just guide us as we go through our discussion and that we would just honor you with everything we do and say and think. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so let's go through does everybody have the one from last week? Or does anybody need one? I don't know if everybody was here. Our huge group tonight. We're down a few. Okay, so we're doing this, the sacrifice offering, I guess, of Isaac. Okay, so what about the setting? We're just going to discuss just different things you thought. What about the setting? I think of it like a movie scene, opens. Yeah, he's in Beersheba. Yes, They just made the He just made the treaty with Abimelech and Beersheba. Beer. Yes. Yeah, that's where the mountain is. Mm-hmm. In the Philistines. Okay, so I think of it like, the curtain opens and we see, Abraham getting Isaac ready and saddling the donkey, it says, and, getting ready to take him. And so then what contributes to the mood of the story then, or God tested Abraham? Yes, yeah, dun dun dun. It's a test, right? Yeah, it's just those words that are used that we automatically go, oh, okay, that explains so much when you say God tested Abraham. It was intentional. It wasn't a punishment. We know that it wasn't anything negative. It was a test. Yeah. So yeah, we know something's going to happen that's going to be fairly difficult because it's a test. Um, okay, what else? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the words that next part of it is specific words or phrases or scenes that hint at impending conflict. Yeah, the testing and then the just throwing it out there. You're gonna you offer him there as a burnt offering. And your only before that it says take your son, your only son. Now we know he wasn't technically his only. He had Ishmael also, but yeah, we know that he was the only son that the promise is coming through. Yes, the light will be off if it's on. Does that make sense? Okay.
I have a question. The, do you see, is there any other scripture in the Bible that where God tells a prophet or someone to sacrifice their only child?
I don't think so. That I
So is
know of
this
offhand.
foreshadowing what is yet to come?
Yes, I think it is. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and read this in this Jesus Bible. I love this Bible. I'm not making a plug. I'm just saying that. But that's out of the Jesus Bible. It's a commentary that's written, and I was going to that brings up this because it describes some things that uh, okay, where do I want to start here? So, okay, we know that Abraham had another son, Ishmael, but Isaac was the only son in which all of God's promises resided because he was born of Sarah. Isaac represented the continuation of God's promise to bless all the nations of the earth through Abraham's descendants, which was in Genesis 12, and the ultimate promise to destroy evil in the world, which was back to Genesis 3:15, where he promised to destroy evil. So we do see that foreshadowing and pointing to Jesus as his only son, God's only son sacrificed. Everything about Isaac's life was the result of God's supernatural plan and provision. Against all odds, they became pregnant with Isaac despite being 90 years old. And now, in spite of all that Isaac represented, God asked Abraham to surrender his beloved son. Okay, then it goes on. The toll of this command on Abraham and Sarah must have been enormous. What a powerful picture of what God did to his only son for us. Little is said of Abraham's thoughts or the boy's mother. All we read is the account of the father's complete obedience. Abraham laid the wood for the offering on his son's back, and Isaac carried that to the altar, which also tells us the age of Isaac, or gives us some idea of the age of Isaac too. He wasn't a little child because he was able to carry the wood. Yes.
Do you also see that Abraham is becoming extremely close, that God is bringing Abraham extremely close to him, that maybe he was the favorite, or it appears that way because of their lives are going to be parallel
You mean,
with regard to sacrificing
that Abraham
and
is
how,
close to
what
God?
the test
Yeah.
and the strength that Abraham is more godlike,
Yeah, and
I guess.
I think that, yeah, there's definitely some connection there. I think there's so many parallels that I don't know, that I think scholars have studied. But I do think that is one thing, and I think we have the privilege of having the whole Bible. We have the privilege of knowing, from where we are. And you think, well, Abraham didn't, he believed God and he trusted God, and that was reckoned to him, as righteousness. But he didn't have the whole picture. He didn't have the New Testament. That was before. So I think how much harder it was for him, to, I don't know. That just made me think of that I think there is a lot of parallel with that. But that's interesting to think of, that it might have drawn him and God closer together because of those. But Abraham wouldn't have known that at the time. Yeah, we do, exactly. We do. Um, okay, yeah. Isaac also had said, here's the wood and the fire, but where's the lamb? So we know also he was old enough to recognize that, which even a small child could, but a small child probably couldn't have carried the wood. Okay, but then it says that Abraham offers a glimpse of his faith in God's provision by saying God will provide for himself the lamb. And that's 22:7-8. Abraham understood, like the Apostle Paul, that God must keep his promises in order to uphold his own righteousness. The sacrifice of Jesus not only fulfilled God's promise to destroy evil and save the world, it also provided God's righteousness by providing a punishment for the sin of the whole world. Just as God provided Jesus himself to demonstrate his righteousness and take the punishment we deserve, so also he provided a ram himself to uphold his promise by keeping Isaac alive. So that just related more to your question about the time there with Jesus. So read that. That was pretty. So yes, the whole thing. Yes, your answer to your question is yes. It does foreshadow Jesus. All right. So let's go on down to characters. Who all have we got? hmm Yeah. Yeah. Weren't there two? Yeah. Took two of his young men with him. Yeah. So two, the donkeys, or at least one donkey we know. Yeah. Two young men and his son. So there wasn't a whole big. And God. Thank you, Joe. And God. And God. You, and I know. I wonder, one thing I read, and this was, in fact, I just had Googled, I was looking up some stuff on like the age of, different studies. And this was a Wikipedia thing, so I don't put too much stock in it. It's just something somebody could. But evidently there was a rabbinical, however you say that, the rabbi's rabbinical tradition that the age of Isaac at the time of binding could be 37, which I've never heard that old. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm not putting a lot of stock in this. I'm just throwing an idea out there. And then it says rabbis also thought that the reason for the death of Sarah could have been the news of the intended sacrifice of Isaac. Now, I've never heard that. I don't put a lot of stuff. Don't say, well, Lori said. But I just thought it wasn't. Yeah, but I thought it was an interesting thought. And if nothing else, it makes you think of her. Did she know what was going on? If she did, can you imagine her obedience to just sit back and wait? You know, yeah. Either way, it makes you think of her thoughts. That was just, yeah, that would be so hard. So okay, so yeah, you got the picture then, and I guess in this scene we sort of add Sarah in the background, I guess, as a character who's waiting. And what were you going to say?
Laurie, would you read? Because I have a different Bible. I have the Living Bible.
Uh-huh.
Right. I didn't bring my other one with me. Would you mind reading verse 5?
Sure. This is ESV translation. I'm sure some other people have some others too. We could. Okay, so verse 5. Then Abraham said to his young men. Now I'm assuming that would have been the two of his young men that it says from verse 3. Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you.
Okay, come again to you.
Mm-hmm.
That leaves speculation that Isaac is coming back.
Yeah.
That he won't be sacrificed there.
And I've always, heard scholar or people say, that is one thing that really shows Abraham's faith, that he thinks one way or the other, he's going to come back. And I think one thing I've heard some people say that he, could have even thought that, even if that he would raise him from the dead, or that, something that somehow, but he had faith. He didn't have to know how God would do it, but he believed he would. So, because he believed the promise of Isaac being the one to continue his line. So, and you think of all the stuff we've read, back in a few chapters earlier, where they got so specific. First said you'll have any descendants. Then they get specific and say you'll have a son, and then you'll have a son in a year from now. And you see all this, and you think, if we hadn't had all those specific promises, or if Abraham hadn't had them, I think it could be easy to say, okay, God's gonna have to give me another son, or something. There could have been somebody. You gonna say something else? Oh no, no, it's good. It's good. It's good. No. Oh, use the microphone. Sorry, so we can hear. Sorry, or so they can hear. I know.
Okay. One of the questions, do you feel that God is testing Abraham's free will, since God created all of us with free will? Do you think he's also testing his free will at that point?
I think it could be. Yeah, he's testing something, right? He's testing his faith. He's testing, which that would be part of it, whether he's going to obey. So yeah, that's a definitely a valid point. Yeah, that his free will would be part of that. So we've got, do we really have protagonists and antagonists here? Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, I'll get the mic. Yeah. We've got 4. I should put one on every row.
Okay. I may get struck for saying this, but I put God as the antagonist. At the beginning,
I could see
he is coming across as the one who is setting up this conflict and wanting this young man killed.
Right.
So I said in the beginning, it would appear that God is the protagonist, the antagonist there. So,
well, if you thought of this completely independent, take it out of the Bible, you look at it as just a storyline, that we don't know any of the history, we don't know who God is, or anything like that, then definitely would be, because
at that point in the story. Mm-hmm. Now I knew how the story ended,
right.
And I know he's not,
right.
But I thought if you're just reading the story as is, mm-hmm. at that point in the story, it could appear that mm-hmm. he would be the antagonist. He's causing the conflict there, the problem.
Yeah, he's asking him to do something that seems to be the problem. Well, and you think of so many, series or movies or whatever that we watch, that I sit and try for so long to figure out, is this a good guy or is this a bad guy?
Who's the bad guy?
Right. I don't know. We've been watching some stuff on Netflix lately, and I like the crime detective, stuff. And Steve will go, he's a crook. And I'll go, no. And then I really wanted him to be a good guy, but he's not. I told you. And we go back and forth on, no, I thought he was a bad guy, but he's turning out I like him now, and I didn't want to like him, or. Anyway, I'm sure y'all can relate. So, thinking of this as all just a story, then that's true. That's yeah. It seems like
But I did say then by the end he was the protagonist.
right. Yeah,
He was the good guy.
and that's really what bad guy, good guy is really such a general term for protagonist and antagonist because he's not the bad guy, but he is the one. Yeah, yeah. I see exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
That's good. So was your character judgment of any of them? Well, I guess that answers it.
And I
Just
said,
because you just said by the end.
In the
Yeah.
end,
Yeah.
God is the sovereign, loving God who provides the sacrifice.
Yeah. So then that moves down to the resolution. So where's the problem? Is the problem introduced at the beginning or in the middle? Where's the problem introduced? Yeah, right at the beginning. And we saw that in Genesis when we did the one that we didn't go over, Martha. We're going to have a special night to go over that. You still have it. But we saw that in Genesis, right at the very beginning. We saw the problem, the fall comes in right at the very beginning of the story. So, yeah. And you see that a lot with just generally storylines. It's, we think people are so, smart figuring out how to write stories. Well, God kind of set the standard. Okay. So the problem's introduced right at the beginning. And then, so the problem is, we've talked about that he's going to be sacrificed, or we think he's going to sacrifice his only son. And then, so is there a resolution, and how? What's the resolution? God provided the sacrifice. Yeah, he turned around, and there was a.
And in one of my translations, and I don't remember which one, but it says when they ask Abraham, what are we going to? How is this going to happen? Is God going to, are we going to really sacrifice Isaac? Mm-hmm. And it says, God will provide himself a lamb instead of a lamb. So the wording there makes it sound like he is the lamb that he provided for us.
Yeah.
I always like that translation.
Yeah,
that
version. That is good. Yeah. Yeah, and then we know that. Yeah, so we know that God also called the name of that place, going back to setting, the Lord will provide, because he knew that God would provide, so he called the name of that place there. So I guess we could say Mount Moriah is Mount the Lord will provide. I don't know, but he called the name of that place that. Okay, so what about the turning points? So we've kind of talked about how the characters change and how the setting change. How do you think the setting, like where they are, and how do you see it in your mind of the setting changing? I mean, I don't. Yeah. I know. I don't know either. I should have looked that up. Yeah. And think as they're traveling. If they could shut off their mind as they're traveling, I'm sure that would have been easier. But yeah. And,
Can you imagine how Abraham felt knowing in his mind that he was taking his son and that his son knew nothing until they got there? And then how Isaac was willing,
Yes.
There
I've
was
thought about
nothing
that.
complicated about that.
Mm-hmm. I've thought about that a lot because obviously if he was big enough to carry the wood, he was probably big enough to struggle with his 90 something, however his elderly father, very elderly father.
Doesn't this show a tremendous amount of faith,
Yes.
not only with Abraham, but also with Isaac?
Yeah, and the relationship between Abraham and Isaac and the character of Abraham, I think that shows, just that right there tells you a lot about his character, that Isaac was willing to obey and do, whatever, to trust him and to trust God, but to trust him and trust that he trusts God. And I don't know, if it were me, I would be thinking, did I really hear you right, God? I probably messed this up, and it would be all about me. So no. Yes, exactly. That's where I'd fit in. Yeah. Okay, so the main turning point in this passage seems pretty obvious, but what do you? I think of it where he's about to kill him, and God says, the voice comes from the sky, or I think of it like that, and he says, "Here I am," or sorry, he says, "Do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing that you've not withheld your son." And once again he says, "Your only son," from me. And I think both times that's mentioned that way, that definitely, I know. I know. Yeah, it is. It is. Do y'all see any other turning points? I mean, anybody have any other thoughts on that or anything? Or just I go for the obvious one, but there could be, I'm sure, other ways that people might see it. Okay, so what about the mood change? How does the mood? Does it? We start off and we're he just made a treaty, right? So everything's kind of okay, and then God tells him. So how does your mood? Your mood kind of goes more tension, right? I think of it going up, more tension. God tells you to do this, and it builds up and builds up and builds up, and then by the end, though, we have resolution. Yeah, 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 yeah. Going home. That we're pretty happy. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So then application, the moral of the story or lessons you've learned. What would you put as like an overarching theme? Just something brief.
I put God will provide.
God, that's good. Yeah.
And then
Where I put it, yeah. Yep. That's good. And then God is trustworthy too. That's not just that we should trust him, but that we can trust him. I've been thinking, and I think I may have mentioned it already, I've been thinking a lot the last few months for some reason. It's been coming into my mind about the difference between trusting in God and trusting God. For me, there's a difference. I think of it like trusting in God is saying, yeah, he can do that. He's able to do that. But trusting him is really when you're, rubber hits the road, when you're saying, I trust him that he will do that, or that he will provide. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So huh? Yeah, yeah, that's how I think too, because I have to think that he can do it before I'm willing to say that he will. But yeah, and also that then that's where it gets to be all about me, because I start second guessing. Well, am I really asking the right things? Because if he doesn't do this, maybe I'm not asking the right things. All right. Okay, so we are at 30 minutes. We're gonna our handouts today. Um, We've got life of, and I've got Isaac, Jacob, which is Israel, and Joseph. And there's a lot there. We're not going to get through all that today, I don't think. I know last week was such a rush getting through Abraham. But they're so intermixed, but I didn't have enough room to put Abraham and Isaac and Joseph all on the same page. So we had the one from last week that was Abraham. Then we've got there's a few taken from last week's that were about Isaac. So you can see the first few. And then we jump into Isaac. So I'll probably just go through like the left side tonight, which is up to where Isaac dies. We'll just kind of go through that, and then we'll start next week with. But it's so intermixed because time. If you're doing this timeline, things happen. In, Joseph does things before Isaac even dies, or things like that. So, all right. So we are looking at. Okay, so we're going to start with where Esau and Jacob are born, because we went last week through Abraham's life, and which included Isaac married Rebekah before Abraham died. So that was the beginning of 25, I believe, where Abraham died. Yeah. Okay, so 19 is where the birth of Esau and Jacob. Okay, so Esau and Jacob are born, and they're born to Isaac and Rebekah. They're twins, and Esau is the firstborn and Jacob is the secondborn. And we know just from the storyline then, as we go through and read, that Jacob, usually it would be the firstborn that would be the one to have the inheritance, the birthright, things like that. We know from the story that Jacob ends up with it. So there was favoritism. So 25 also then mentions that there was favoritism, and that's an important part, because that's how this all plays out. That Isaac favored Esau. It says Isaac loved Esau and Rebekah loved Jacob, but I think we would take it as loved more, because I can't imagine Isaac not. It didn't say he didn't love Jacob, but he loved Esau more, and Rebekah loved Jacob more. So then Esau sells his birthright for a bowl of stew and some bread. But if you're looking at this, let's see, where was it that I noticed this? Okay, so Jacob was cooking stew, and Esau initiates it and says, let me have some of that. But Jacob takes advantage of that and doesn't just give it to him. Jacob has what is his name means deceiver or yeah. So he he kind of has that going already. He's thinking about this. So he takes advantage of that and says, well, if you sell me your birthright, I'll give you this. And Esau is, okay, well, I kind of think of him as, yeah, all right, whatever, I'm hungry. Yeah, I'm hungry. Um, so and then it says at the bottom, or at the end of that chapter, then Esau despised his birthright, which is just kind of I guess the result of what he did, that he didn't value it at all because he sold it for some food, some temporary food. Okay, so then there was a famine, which sends Isaac to Gerar, if I've got that name right. And God tells him not to go to Egypt. So unlike Abraham, he had told him to go to Egypt. So then this is, if I'm thinking that right, yeah, this is where, yeah, he tells him not to go to Egypt. So he just stays there in Gerar. Anybody know how to say that? Gerar. Yeah, he stays there in Gerar. So then we have Abimelech, which is, from everything I can see, it's the same Abimelech. That didn't occur to me till looking through all this. And I went, and I even asked Steve, he's like, I don't know, probably. And but I looked, and he's the same king of Gerar, same place, so it's got to be the same guy. So I put sister next generation. She's my sister, the next generation. So we have Isaac repeating the same thing Abraham did with his wife, saying, oh, she's my sister. But I laughed because I was telling Steve, we were talking about it, and I said, can you imagine? Abimelech would have been thinking, what is up with these people? What is wrong with his family? What is the deal? But Steve said, well, it worked for Abraham because he ended up getting more possessions, and they sent him away with all these possessions. And Steve's like, it worked. Why wouldn't Isaac do it? And I said, well, kind of think of it that way. Right. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah, at least his was half true. You're right. That's exactly right. He had some ground. Abraham had some ground to stand on. But it just shows you all the things that are passed down generation to generation, and that we do the same things. We pass down things we may not even want to, but we do. Yeah. So Isaac prospers and moves. So it ended up working out okay for him. He moved away from Abimelech, and then he ends up, let's see, this is the end of 26, in back at Beersheba, Beersheba. I never say that right. Yeah, Beersheba, and God appears to him there. So that's in 26, 23, and God tells him, "I'm the God of Abraham, your father. Fear not, for I'm with you. Will bless you and multiply your offspring." So he goes through the whole blessing again, and you'll see this repeated a few times in this chapter, where he repeats this blessing over and over. And we talked about that a little bit, about the repetition and all that. And then he built an altar there, and then it says the servants dug a well, and I'm not real sure. This isn't where they stopped up. No, later you'll see there's some tension where the people stop up the wells, but I don't know if that's. But it just says he dug a well there, and I don't know what the significance to that is, unless it's the wells that we'll get into in a little bit later on. But anyway, okay, so then Esau. Right at the bottom of that chapter, at the end of 26, when Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. And we know why. One reason was, because they were told to not marry the Canaanite or the Hittite, the foreign, not to take foreign wives. And so the lot made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. I would like to think that was just because they took, foreign wives, but I don't know. I don't know if it's their personalities or if that's the only, but we know that already, so it made life bitter. It grieved them. I think some translations say it grieved Isaac and Rebekah. And to me, I thought that was interesting because I started thinking about how Esau was Isaac's favorite, but yet he was the one that despised his birthright and that took wives he wasn't supposed to take. And you think, oh, I know, that so many times our kids can do things that just break our hearts, and we think, or just things that we go, oh, I hope this works out good. But anyway, I think of it like that. I think, oh, Isaac, I'm sure it grieved Rebekah too, because it says it did. but I think with Isaac, he really favored Esau. So in some ways, I kind of wonder, do you not get it now? And then in some other ways, I think, oh, poor guy. So, all right. Okay, so then Jacob steals Esau's blessing. So we go through that 27 and 20 and part of into 28. So all of 27 and then into 28 is where Jacob, with Rebekah's help, deceives Isaac. I say deceives Jacob, deceives Isaac, and Jacob, but steals Esau. Sorry, y'all know what I'm trying to say. Steals Esau's blessing, and of course now in around verse 39 and 40 of 27, he also blesses Esau. I mean, I look at it that way as that Esau has a blessing, but it's not the firstborn blessing, not the blessing he wanted. But it does, it does also, it says, away from the fatness of the earth will be your dwelling, away from the dew of heaven on high. But by your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. So, I think of that as a blessing in general terms. But, he tells him how he's gonna be, and we see Esau fulfilling that even, when he takes the foreign wives. I mean, even before that, we see that happening. Okay, so now Esau hates Jacob, so Jacob is afraid, and he probably should be at this point. So I put that he flees and is sent to. I say he flees to his uncle Laban, but he is sent there because Rebekah helps to work it out that way. She says in that last couple of verses of 27, then Rebekah said to Isaac, I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? Drama. She's kind of, and before that it goes on, she's working to try to get Jacob to go. She wants him protected, and Jacob probably does need protection. So then Jacob, get my names mixed up. Isaac agrees to send Jacob. So he calls in Jacob and blesses him and sends him to his people to take a wife. So, did somebody say something? Okay, so then on the way, as he's leaving, he goes to Haran, and he ends up in let's see, wait a minute, is this at Bethel? Yes, okay, 28:10. Yeah, his dream, the Jacob's ladder dream, where he sees the angels going up and down the ladder to God. So God, also tells him, "I'm with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land." So he repeats the blessing again, that he's not going to leave him. He keeps reassuring him, and then I've always liked the idea, just the picture of this, that verse 18 of 28. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head. So the pillow that he had, his stone that he had for a pillow, he sets it up as a pillar and pours oil on top of it and calls the name of that place Bethel. Before it was Luz. Go on down to the bottom. Let's see, that last verse 22. And this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. So he vows to give things back, to give a tithe back to God. But that he took that pillar that was his pillow because he valued that dream, that God, showed him that dream, and set that pillar up as a pillow. I just love that idea. I love all the symbolic things that make you remember something, and so, I just really like that. Okay, so then Jacob marries Leah and Rachel and serves 14 years for Laban. Now, when you go through the story, if you notice, and this was not something I noticed until recently when I was going through this, that he served the 7 years and then got Leah instead of Rachel. He thought he was serving it for Rachel. And then I always had it in my head that he served another 7 years, and then got Rachel. But he gets Rachel before he serves. So it says to finish Leah's bridal week. So he has a week between his weddings, I guess. Anyway, before he gets Rachel. So he marries them both basically at the same time. But he served 7 years, and then he has to serve 7 more years. We know he ends up serving more years than that, about 20, I think. But yeah, so he serves those. It's kind of. But he marries his wife in the middle of the 14 years. Okay, so then Joseph is born in 30, and we see, well, we see all of Jacob's children, 29, the end of 29 and 30, and then we see Joseph specifically, 30, 22. So, yeah, we see all his other children, and we see Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah by Leah. Oh, and I think is this one of the handouts? Yeah. Yeah, I've got the tribes of Israel, this handout. I found this and thought it was good. If I don't have to recreate something, I don't. I just, you can see where I got it right there. So I'm giving credit. But yeah, this I thought was really good because you can see, it gives you a visual in your mind of who's by who. Even though to me it's just hard to remember unless I see something visual. So yeah, you see Reuben, Simeon. So his firstborn was Reuben, then Simeon, Levi, Judah. Now also note, and I've got another, but we'll get to this later, that Judah is the tribe that Jesus comes down through. And I think we did have that in another handout that had the lineage of Jesus. But keep in mind that Judah is the lineage that Jesus comes down through. Levi, I think I'm right on this. Levi is that Moses comes down through. Moses comes down through Levi's lineage. So, sorry. Okay. So everybody, they all have, and we'll see this. Sorry, we'll see this in a little bit. I didn't get this one good. Okay, we'll see it in a little bit where when Isaac Isaac blesses all Jacob's sons. He gives them kind of an individual blessing based on that's appropriate for them. But anyway, I thought this would help. That he has the 4 kids by Leah, then he has the 2 by Leah's servant, 2 by Bilhah, and then 2 by Rachel, eventually Joseph and Benjamin. And of course, we know Joseph is one of the ones that we've got a lot of information on, so we'll talk about him too. Okay, so Joseph is finally born. And then we go back to Jacob and his flocks increasing. And I put despite Laban. He made an agreement. Y'all remember that one? He made an agreement with Laban that he would take the spotted and speckled. Well, Laban went in and took them out before he could take them. So despite Laban deceiving him and stealing what he promised he would give him, but God, right? This is all you have to say, I guess. But God, I mean, it goes through, and it's kind of confusing because it goes through this process that he went through with peeling off branches and putting them in front of the watering trough, and even no matter what, God had to do it, because we know that's not going to really change anything without God being the one to do it. So he went through this process, and why, God could have just, who knows why God works the way he does, but we know it's always for the good. And, God could have just, snapped his fingers and said, no, I'm going to just pop him up there. But anyway, so he goes through that process. So in spite of that, he still prospers and his flocks increase. So then he returns to Canaan in 31 because God tells him, the Lord said to Jacob, this is verse 3 of 31, then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Well, we know that Laban had not wanted to let him go, so they kind of go back and forth. Anyway, eventually he gets to go, and he returns to Canaan after serving 20 years for Laban. So his 7 years that he started off to serve for Rachel ends up 20 years and 2 wives and 2 concubines later and a bunch of kids. Yeah, so then the end of 31, the very last sentence, mine says, then Laban departed and returned home. So he finally got to go back home. So now Jacob prepares to meet Esau, because even though he's going home now, he's still afraid of a little wary of Esau, which he knows. He deceived him. He, in human terms, he should be. We know that God worked from this. But, okay, so Jacob, let's see. Yeah, prepares to meet Esau. And then he wrestles. Yeah, that's where he has the verse 22, where he wrestles with God. And I think most of you may know the story, but yeah, where a man appears to him. Let's see. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, so he was by himself. He was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. So we know it's a man, and most everything I've ever read said that this is Jesus in, God in human form, that this is Jesus, because he does physically wrestle with him. And it says when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, And when Steve and I always kind of thought, I don't know, I couldn't really understand that. What, Jesus could prevail? What in the world? And I was talking to Steve we were talking about it. He's always, I bounce things off of. And he said, well, in the physical form, Jesus, the man there, was not able to, he wasn't as strong as Jacob. And so he said in his God, so if he's just in all his manpower, he wasn't as strong. But in his God power, if you look at it that way, then he touched the hip socket and put his hip out of joint, is what it says. So that kind of helped a little bit. I thought, well, that's interesting. I'd never really, I guess when I think of a man, even though I think of Jesus, I still think of him as being more than man. I mean, I don't think of him as being a normal man, but in his normal man state, I guess he wasn't. Because it says he did not prevail against Jacob, so he touched his hip. And then it does go on in verse 28. Then he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. So he changes his name to Israel. For you have striven with God and with man and have prevailed. So we know that it is God. That's one of the reasons we know that it's Jesus, because we know Jesus is the human form of God. Okay, so, and also 35:10, God mentions again about changing his name. You don't have to turn over there, but that's why I've got the 35:10 reference there also, because he mentions changing this name to Israel there also. Okay, so Jacob meets Esau, and of course, Jacob sends all these gifts ahead, splits up his family, sends them all, puts Rebecca and her kids in the back of the line so that they're more protected. It goes through finally, but he meets Esau, and there's not conflict. Yeah, he got over it. There you go. I'm trying to think of the word. Yeah, those little white round things called eggs. Yeah. Okay, conflict. That's what I was trying. Yeah, there's not conflict. He had gotten over it. So, so they meet, and then let's see. It's the end of 33. Okay. So let's see. Like 33:15. Esau said, "Let me leave you with some of the people who are with me." But he said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and then verse 18, he comes safely to the city of Shechem. And earlier, I didn't go back quite far enough. Earlier he says, where he says we're going to meet at Seir. Where is that? It's in that same chapter, but wow, I thought I circled it. I didn't. 14, yeah. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me and at the pace of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir. So Jacob tells him he's going to meet him in Seir, but then he doesn't. I don't know why. I haven't looked into a lot to that, but he doesn't. He goes on and he ends up in Shechem. And we will see here in just a little bit that bad things happen at Shechem. So we kind of wonder, had he gone on to Seir like he said he was going to do? Would that have, I don't know, but we know that God also makes good out of everything. So, okay, so Esau goes on to Seir, Jacob goes to Shechem, and then there's the Dinah Incident, and the brothers kill all the Shechem. So Dinah essentially is raped by the ruler's Shechem, the son of Hamor. This is in 34. And at first, Jacob doesn't do anything, but he says he's waiting till his sons get home. So I don't know. I know in BSF this year we're going through Genesis, and then we just got through this, and we really talked about that a lot. And I don't think there was a lot of, why he didn't do anything. Was he just waiting for his sons? But then his sons took it too far. His sons, got angry, and out of their anger, they manipulate and deceive the men of Shechem and tell them that because Shechem wants to marry her, and for one, is not supposed to marry a foreign, from outside their family. Yeah. So he still, instead of just coming out and saying that, they still use the whole thing of circumcision, though. So they still use God's laws, but in a manipulative way to deceive them. So he tells them, okay, we'll let you marry her if you get all your men circumcised. And the fact that all the men agreed, I'm thinking either they were really scared of their leaders or they were really loyal, one of the two. Because to have all the men of the town agree to do that, it's amazing. I mean, I was thinking of Abraham and all the men, but that was under a different, I always thought that was amazing. But then you look at these people and they're like, wow, okay. But, huh? um, yeah. So anyway, so then the men come in. The brothers Simeon and Levi come in and kill um, all. Well, they initiate it anyway. All the brothers come in and kill all the men after they've been circumcised when they're still sore and a bad time. You're recovering. That's the best way to say. I think it says while they're still sore. That's what made me think of it. Yes, recovering. I like that word better. Yeah, yeah. Okay, but then Jacob does rebuke them. He says, you're bringing the anger of all these people on me, and so then they move to Bethel, and that's where Benjamin is born, and Rachel dies because she dies in childbirth. Right. So we know Benjamin is born there. Okay, then Reuben sleeps with Bilhah and defies Jacob. And that's one little sentence, and there's nothing really more said, and that is, where is it? 35:22. There's nothing more said about it except that one little sentence, 35:22. While Israel lived in that land, Reuben went in and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. But I'm pointing that out because we will see later that there's consequences to that. And from what I have understood, it was a very much a defiance. That's why I put defies. Very much a cultural thing where he's taking a stand to kind of challenge his father, I guess, and really a defiance. So that was a big thing, and we'll see the consequences of that.
Well, and we saw almost exactly the same thing played out with David and his sons, with his daughter and his sons.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah.
And so many of these things are the same, and you think, oh, but here we do the same things over and over, and but yeah, but it reminds us of redemption, right? It reminds us of why we see all this stuff over and over, and we learn from it, but we also are reminded of why we need a savior. Okay, so then Isaac dies, and sorry, looking at the time. And Esau and Jacob both bury him. So we know that they were together and both buried him there. And let's see, we'll get into we could skip over to 48 since we just talked about two of those. We'll skip over to 48 where he blesses, I think it's 48. No, that's not it. Oh, 49. Or 40, chapter 49, sorry. Chapter 49 where Jacob, and just since we've already talked about some of this, Jacob goes through, and this is after he's blessed Joseph, which we'll get into that next week, Joseph's sons. I'm just skipping ahead a little bit, but where Jacob blesses his sons before he dies, and so in verse 3, he calls each of them by name and blesses them appropriately, it says. So Reuben, you're my firstborn by my might and first fruits of my strength. It goes on, unstable. You shall not have preeminence because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So there is, that was a big deal. That wasn't just a, in that culture, and it wouldn't be a big deal, but it's still so many things that I think would be a big deal that are in the Bible. Maybe don't seem to be sometimes. In the culture, we know that sin is sin to God, but we know that was one reason that he definitely talked to Reuben and brought that up about Reuben at the very end. Yeah. I see that as, yeah. Then Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. And what was that from? That was from killing all the men at Shechem. So he goes on through there. Let's see. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen, which I didn't see the oxen thing in there, but cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So that's their consequence. Then Judah goes on about Judah is his brothers will praise him. Let's see, Where's the scepter? Okay, verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. And I read this. And does anybody have an NIV? Would you read that in NIV? Because I read that in NIV and I like the way it said it better. Oh, 49. Oh, we can use, yeah. Sorry. 49, chapter 49, verse 10. And we're talking about Judah. And remember, that's the line that Jesus comes through. So keep
The
that.
scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his.
Yeah. I love the way that's stated because it's very, to me, that is very, that's very much a prophecy of until it comes to he whom it belongs. I think that's how it was. Yeah. So until I can't remember now. Sorry. I should have written it down. I was reading it in NIV this morning, but then I brought my.
And it goes on, to further. He
Yeah,
will
go
tether
ahead.
his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch, and he will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes, and his eyes will be darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just, so there's so much in the Old Testament that points to Jesus when you can, and you wonder if they wondered. Does that mean? I wonder if they even really noticed. I'm sure some people, obviously, I'm sure, some did, but did so many not notice it? And I think of it similar to like we're reading, like when Steve goes through Revelation, or we read something in Revelation, and we try to imagine what he might have been referring to by something that we can sort of relate to modern day. If you're thinking of something like that, and I think, did they do that when they were reading this? Once this was written and they had, a Bible, did they do that? Once they had the scrolls, did they do that too? I wonder if they tried to imagine what he was meaning. I don't know. Anyway, yes, that's definitely pointing to Jesus, and that nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. That between his feet can be counted as, I think, descendants or generations. I should have brought my other Bible because I was reading. Well, I'll study. I have two Bibles, but I didn't want to bring both of them. But I should have written that down. But anyway, that's meaning like his descendants. That the ruler's staff, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. So we know that Judah's line will be the one that will have the ruler. Okay, so some of these others, there's not a lot. Zebulon shall dwell at the shore of the sea and become a haven for ships. Issachar is a strong donkey crouching between the sheepfolds. And some of y'all may have studied some of this more than I have. If y'all have anything that you've, jump in there. Dan shall judge his people. Raiders shall raid Gad. Asher's food shall be rich. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Some of these are kind of vague. I'm not sure what exactly. That's why I said somebody may have studied it more to know some of the history of what this might mean. Joseph, then it goes on to be as a fruitful bough. A fruitful bough by a spring, his branches run over the wall. Then I love this part. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely, yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, by the God of your father who will help you. So he goes on and continues and gives praises to God for Joseph's fruitfulness and his resilience, that it was only because of God's blessings that he was, and at the very last there in verse 26 was him who was set apart from his brothers. Then Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. Didn't understand that necessarily. I haven't done a lot of study on that, but anyway, that was getting a little bit ahead because we'll cover more of some of that last week. But since we talked about some of the sons this week, I wanted to go ahead and jump over there. But all right. I don't know. He probably was. I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember. I'll have to have my family tree to look it up. I cannot keep up. All right. Well, it didn't seem like it was quite as speedy as last week. I don't know. Maybe was it? It would have been if I'd have gone through the whole thing. I thought I was going to go through all these. But yeah. And once again, remember once we get through the, some of the history, mainly these first few books, especially when we get into Psalms and Proverbs and some of those, there's not as many people that it's about. It's sometimes retelling things or relates to some of the stories we've already heard. So, all right, well, let's pray and we will go home. God, we just thank you once again for your blessings, for giving us this wonderful church to meet in, for our church family, our fellowship, and just the joy of having other believers that we can sharpen each other and that we can come together and open your word and study. And God, just help us to apply the things that we learn. Help us to just remember the things that you want us to do, that you would have us to do, and each day to just fall in love with you more. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.